Welcome to the Brattleboro Citizens Breakfast. Today we have the honor of hearing from Peter Elwell, the town manager, talk about the comprehensive review of town operations and the long-term financial plan. So if you've figured out what I'm talking about so far, I'll try to break it down by reference to that great philosopher, Yogi Berra. If you don't know where you're going, you're liable to go someplace else. And with that intro, Peter.
Thank you and good morning, and that was actually right on. That's the spirit in which we undertook these two projects, and the path we hope we're traveling. And you'll be able to judge for yourselves. Those of you who haven't seen the documents or been involved in the process yet, we'll get a chance here in a few minutes to judge for yourselves whether you think we're on the proper course. I'm not going to be overly formal this morning, but I do have some notes to refer to because I want to actually quote from the two documents. I want to draw some pieces of them out to refer to while I make the remarks this morning. And I'm going to try to keep that pretty short. I'm hoping not to talk for more than I was told. About 20 minutes is a good target. I hope to do that or a little less so that we've got plenty of time to do questions for as long as you all want to stay this morning about these two topics or anything else that you'd like to talk about. So the comprehensive review is exactly that. We looked first at the departmental level, internal to the departments. Each one reflected and kind of did a self-evaluation of what was working and what needed attention, and which things were either needing more resources or things that we were committing resources to because we just always have been. You know, it was kind of inertia. So it was a good reflective look at how the departments could improve their operations in service to the community. And together as a management team, we took the broader look at issues that cross departments and have more to do with community interaction and some of the policy level decisions that get made. For instance, one of the big ones that emerged, it's really, I think, pretty evident to those of us who live in and care about Brattleboro, is our need to catch up to some infrastructure needs. There's been a long period of time of addressing things as they get broken rather than in a more proactive way. We've been a lot better about that in the utilities side of the house because there's proper funding for the capital work that goes on the utility side through the fees that we pay for water and sewer. But the basic services that are provided through the general fund, sidewalks and roads and our buildings, have generally been addressed more when it's absolutely necessary. We've had retaining walls that we knew were starting to not be vertical and started to make some plans for how to replace them, but generally have got at it right when they were beginning to fail. So we want to do a better job of that, and that's one of the big themes that emerged. So it is indeed in the Yogi Berra theme of looking down the road and trying to plan better for these things, but it costs a lot of money. So we need to identify where additional resources are required, and we need to identify how we can make additional resources available. One of the ways is to stop doing things that don't need to be done anymore, or to become more efficient in the way we invest in other aspects. So this soup to nuts look at basically everything that we do, from ground level review within the departments to a much more of a 30,000 foot perspective from the management team, generated about 50 or so action items, and we put a draft out at the end of July, and that got some community review and some community involvement. Several of you in the room provided us with input, which we appreciate. When we took the input we had received from the community and reviewed it as a management team and reviewed it one final time with the select board, in the final document that's just been published earlier this month, we have 57 action items broken into things that actually have already been done. There's a handful of things that have already been accomplished that came out of the work that was related to this project. Some things that we're in progress on right now, and then the remaining items are in a 0 to 2 year, 2 to 5 year, and beyond 5 year time frame. So I want to quickly describe what the criteria were that we used for identifying things that should be on this list, and then cite some examples so that you get a feel for the kinds of things that we're talking about. So, one was where we could save money without negatively affecting service to the community. So just do things better and more efficiently, but maintain otherwise what people already have come to expect from town government. Places where we could improve service to the community without increasing costs. So ways in which we could, keep doing what we're doing. I'm sorry, to the reverse of that, to improve what we're doing, but do it without having to pay more money to accomplish it. The third was those things, and capital investment is certainly one area. A related thing, it has some capital aspects to it, but other aspects to it too is information technology. Our computer systems in town have become very outdated. We're going to have to spend some money to bring those up to where they belong, and by doing that, we're going to become more effective at doing all the different things that we do in service to the community. So we described that third category as judiciously increasing cost in specific areas where we have cut too far in the past, or where new investment now would yield significant positive impacts for the community. And that's the hardest one. That's the one where we need a lot of community involvement in helping make that judgment as to where and to what degree it's appropriate to raise taxes in order to accomplish things that we haven't been accomplishing. So a couple of examples, and I'm going to cite just a handful. I don't want to take too much time doing this. They're just representative examples of the kinds of things that are in this, but I think they're helpful. But there were a couple right at the head of the list that we were working on while we were finalizing the comprehensive review, because we knew within our employee benefits package that we had a couple of areas where costs had been escalating quite a lot. And the concern was we couldn't let that trend continue. We had to get the costs under control, but we were really concerned about doing that in a manner that didn't simply reduce the value of the benefit package for town employees. And so we were able to accomplish that together, working with the unions and working with the select board and some of the advisors on the insurance side. Richard's group was very helpful. So we, in the retirement system for the town employees and in the health insurance system for the town employees, what we've been able to do is actually improve the retirement system and maintain the same healthcare coverage. And reduce the cost of both of those by over $100,000 a year. So in the health, it's by creating what they call an HRA, a health reimbursement arrangement. Creating a layer where the town is self-insured above the level of what the employees pay out of their own pockets, and before we hit the Blue Cross insurance, we created a layer where the town has some self-insurance responsibility. The benefit of doing it that way is our risk is contained because it's just that layer, but there is still some risk. But in exchange for that risk, what we get is a substantially lower premium from Blue Cross. Not all employees are going to even get into that HRA layer. Certainly not all employees are going to use up all of what would be available, to pay for their costs in that HRA layer. So there's a savings within the layer, and then there's a savings on the premium from Blue Cross, and the net of that is about $120,000 of annual savings going forward. So actually starting at that, and the value of that will increase over time. Now, that's not to say that health costs won't go up, but as they go up, we will be paying less than we would have if we had just left the plan alone. Similarly, on the retirement side, the town used to be in a defined contribution plan that was operated locally. The town was contributing up to 9% for the civilian employees. The police and firefighters have had a different plan for the last decade or more. But for civilian employees, the town was putting up to 9% of salary into that. We were looking for how the town could spend less money, but not simply reduce the match that was being put into the 401A plan. And we found that the state of Vermont's defined benefit plan, which is actually an improvement for the employees in terms of financial security for their long-term household needs, is more affordable to the town. And the risk, if you get into a defined benefit plan, a lot of employers, public and private, are moving from that over to a defined contribution style. The risk in a defined benefit is if the benefit is too rich and the investments are risky. Vermont has a very long history in the municipal employees retirement system that's operated by the state of behaving like Vermonters. And so it's a very It's a limited benefit, but it's a solid one, and it's been very well managed. And so the proof in the pudding of that is the contributions required from the employees themselves and from the employers, town, have not changed. They've not gone up or down since 1999, through all the ups and downs in the markets. And especially with what happened in 2008 and 2009, most pension plans got into real crisis, and they had to either reduce the benefits or increase the contributions. FEMA's didn't do that. It's been just steady as she goes. And so we feel like it's a really safe change for the town to make and an improvement for the employees. And again, we're saving over $100,000 a year by reducing that commitment. The taxpayers' commitment is now 5.5% of payroll for the civilian employees rather than up to 9%. It was running at about 8.5% aggregated. So I realize already I'm saying too much detail about each one. We're going to be here all morning. So I'm going to hit a couple of other topics, and then I think not go into as much of the details of the plan, and because I want to talk about the long-term financial plan, not as much of the CRTO. I want to talk about the long-term financial plan too, and I really want to make sure that there is plenty of time for your questions. So we did something very similar with solid waste, and you're all much more familiar with that already because you're experiencing it every other week. But thank you for the inconvenience that you've incurred and all of our neighbors have incurred, because together what we've accomplished with that is, by the first switchover that the state compelled us to do with pay-as-you-throw, we realized that we were diverting enough out of the waste stream that was going into recycling and compost that there was an opportunity to store our own garbage for an extra week and go to this every other week and save, again, over $100,000. On that particular case, it's a little better than 120. And so we pushed that idea last summer with some mixed reaction, understandably, some real concern. There are certain households, particularly ones with small children and diapers, for whom this is a real big inconvenience. For everybody else, it's a little bit of an inconvenience at least. It varies depending on your personal circumstances. But together we've done it, and the results are astounding, because in the first 3 months, what we've done is we've compared July, August, September for each of the last 3 years. So it was the last year before pay-as-you-throw, and then the first 3 months of pay-as-you-throw, and now the first 3 months of every other week. And we're just getting, the numbers get better and better and better, and the overall impact has been that we've increased compost. The volume of compost in our community has increased through the curbside program by 160% from 2 years ago till the current situation. Our garbage is down by 60%. And recycling is a little more steady. Each one has improved. Both the commingled containers and the paper has improved. They've improved by lesser amounts because we were already doing a lot of that. But the real big shift is getting garbage out of our garbage bags and into the compost program, which is good for the planet and good for our pocketbooks. Net savings to the town for that in just the operation of the garbage program is running better than $100,000 a year. There was a savings, actually, if you include the savings when we went to pay-as-you-throw, there was savings then too, and there's about $100,000 a year of additional savings this year for going to the every other week collection. There's also some additional factors related to the cost, because more is going into compost, and because compost is sold at profit at the solid waste district. There's some regional benefit to that for the town. It's the biggest payer into the solid waste district, and for the other municipalities that participate there. So it's a little more complicated, but just in the cost of operating our curbside solid waste program, the costs are down by about $100,000 this year. We talked about capital improvements. I won't go further there except to say that the transition from where we've been to where we need to be is going to take some years, and it won't be without some pain and some difficult decisions to make. We can't just say we've been doing this by addressing emergencies, and starting this year we're going to have a proper and sustainable capital improvement plan. We're working first in the utility funds to get there because we can get there faster because they're better funded. We're working there in steps each year, trying to get a little closer to fund more fully and to define more completely the needs of the community, so that the idea is that within a few years from now we'd be in a position where if we're not fully funding the needs, at least we're able to be really clear with each other about what we're not funding, as opposed to, well, we've identified a bunch of things we need to do, but that's more money than we can afford this year. We're going to put $600,000 into it this year and do what we can. We've had enough years of that to where things got pushed out we've had a capital improvement plan, but it hasn't realistically identified what needs to be done on a reasonable schedule. So we've had, for instance, years where the first year, the capital plan is done as 5-year planning. So the first year is the one that's always being adopted and funded, and then there's 4 more years of forecasting what we think needs to be done in the near term. And consistently what we've had is under $1 million in the first year, and then millions of dollars in the near-term out years. And we're just not going to do that. We're not going to spend $3 million next year or $4 million the year after. So what we need to do is get really realistic with ourselves about the pace at which we can address catching up to our infrastructure needs and fund it. And that particular one is in that third category. And so it's going to take a lot of work together to decide, how much more are we willing to pay in our taxes and in our annual budget in order to invest more fully in our infrastructure needs. There's embedded within that some continued energy efficiency work, which will be part of the capital program, but also reduce costs in certain areas for operations in addition to being good for the planet. There are flood resiliency projects within that are not maintaining what we currently have, but actually trying to be smarter about some things we've learned, not just from Irene, but from other aspects of climate change and threats that rising water poses to certain parts of our community. We have a problem that we've identified internally with our workers' compensation program. We're having too many workers' compensation claims, and we've not adequately managed those claims. So our experience is poor, and our costs are going up really fast, and faster really than any other single operating cost for the town is our workers' compensation cost. That's not a completely controllable cost, but we can do a lot better than we've been doing. The unfortunate part is, as we aggressively address that, which we are, when we have some success, right now we're really still in just kind of the end of the problem identification and the beginning of addressing, putting some solutions in place. As that has some positive impact, it's going to take a few years before we start to see that in the budget and see those costs start to come down, because there's a smoothing that's done actuarially. So if you have one big spike year or one really good year when nobody gets hurt, it doesn't skew the numbers. They smooth that out over a rolling 5-year period. So it'll take us a little while to see the benefit of that. It's taken us a little while to get into the problem that we're in, but we've identified that, and we've shown the impact of that in the long-term financial plan so that we can see the magnitude of that. It's a couple $100,000 of increase each year over the next couple of years, and that's daunting when we're trying actually to redirect money of that magnitude into capital work. So I'm going to stop there. I had a few others I was going to mention as part of the highlight, but I think it's important to move on to the long-term financial plan. Why did we do that? Well, we do a budget each year, and because we're in Vermont, there's a lot of community involvement in that process, and ultimately town meeting is the approvers rather than just at the governing body level with the select board. And so, we're all engaged in that, and we balance our interests of what we want to invest in and what we can afford. Well, we've been doing that, and well, I would argue, in terms of there is an ample opportunity for people to advocate for the things that are important to them, including holding the line financially. But because our emphasis has been very heavy on holding the line financially, and because we haven't had a longer-term perspective, we tend to make decisions as to, well, how can we limit to the greatest degree any cutting and reducing of service levels and maintain a tax rate where we're not increasing at a level that people can't afford. That's right. That's one of the fundamental principles we have to have when we're doing budgeting. But by doing it in just a 1 year at a time process, we haven't been able to take full advantage of understanding how doing certain things now might actually make things easier as we go forward. or where doing something now might make a future decision harder because it'll limit our resources that we have available then. So it's really important for us to be looking forward at how the decisions made today will positively or negatively affect the ability to make additional decisions in the future. We've prepared this initial this initial long-term financial plan as a 5-year history and a 5-year forecast, with this fiscal year being the year that is smack in the middle of that. And as you go out to the 5th year, those numbers aren't completely reliable. I'd be the first to say that there's some assumptions built in. We've tried in the plan to be really clear about what those assumptions are, and where there's really solidly reliable numbers, like our debt service is going to go down because unless we borrow some more funds, we know what we're going to owe in paying back the bonds for the police fire facility and the other debt that the town has incurred over the years. And we don't have plans to borrow any more money in the near term. We want to stop borrowing for shorter term things like equipment, where the town had been doing some shorter term banknotes for a while. That incurs interest charges that we don't need to incur if we're managing our year-to-year purchases of new equipment in a more planned way. And so because we don't plan to take on new debt during this upcoming 5 years, and because we know exactly what we already owe, we can very precisely predict how much savings we're going to have in debt service, how that annual cost is going to go down, and free up some resources, either to direct into capital or to provide tax savings or for whatever ultimately comes out of the decision making about budgets. But we know what that is. On things like employee salaries and benefits, we have a pretty good feel for what those are going to be, because we've recently negotiated 3-year contracts and we know the commitments the town has made. But there's some forecasting in that. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with health insurance costs, even though we've got a pretty good feel and a reasonable forecast there. And other things like that. So that's an area where we've got a solid forecast, but it still requires some estimating. And then there's other things where it's just trends. We know what we've been spending, and we don't really have an informed way to say it's going to increase by this or it's going to decrease by that. And so we make a reasonable guess, and we identify what our reasonable guess is, and put what we hope to be a responsible number in the plan. I want to stress that we tried to be very conservative in those guesses that we made. We wanted to not be in a position where we had described, had assumed things that if they didn't happen would put the town into a precarious position. And we were really clear about calling out what those are. So, for instance, we assumed no increase at all in the grand list. Well, we did that because our grand list grows by really small increments, and it's hard to predict how much it's going to go up, and when it does go up, it doesn't create a significant impact for the rest of us. The days of an enormous new industrial facility coming in or lots of new commercial development up on Putney Road like happened decades ago are behind us. And so the reinvestment in the community in terms of private property and the value on the grand list is happening in smaller increments. But it's true that over the last decade or more, every year the grand list has grown. So we can expect that there will be some benefit to that. Our numbers will turn out a little better than we've predicted in here, because the grand list will likely grow. But we don't know for sure that it will, and we don't know about how much it will, and that increment is going to be pretty small, and so we assume just absolutely flat, to be conservative. Another area where we did that was related to the rent that we receive for people who occupy some space at the municipal center and the reformer space that they will be occupying up at the Black Mountain Road police facility. We are this close to a lease. I would love to be able to tell you terms of the lease, but I'm only this close to finish with that. I think as soon as November 1st, it's likely that the select board will be addressing that matter in public, and everybody will know what those terms are. It may be November 15th before we're 100% finished with that, but we're very close. So there is going to be rental income at 62 Black Mountain Road. But at the time we were preparing the long-term financial plan, even though we were confident of that, we were still working on the terms, and we didn't know exactly how much, so we predicted zero. It's not going to be zero. It's going to be better than that by some tens of thousands. Likewise, we have rental space already at the municipal center. There's tenants there that are going to stay. Sovereign rent space there. We've got some state of Vermont rental space there already. So there's already some rental income at the municipal center, and when the police vacate, we do expect to be able to lease that space and make more. But that's far less defined even than the situation with the reformer, and so we didn't assume any particular amount of income, even though we will make some amount of income in that space. We assume zero. So without belaboring that, there's choices we made over and over again in the long-term financial planning process that are like that in order to make sure that when we forecast what we think the impact might be for property taxes, that we're at a number that I can't say is worst case scenario, because really horrible things could happen. We could have a whole bunch of retaining walls fall down at once that we just have to go out and replace. We could have another Irene. I mean, there could be things that happen that create a worst case scenario. But what this is a really sort of intentionally pessimistic look at where we will be financially so that we can make good decisions and make these numbers better. And I think that's important because the forecasted property tax increases over the 5-year period are, the first one is forecasted to be 5.25% increase, which is a little better than 6 cents. I want to qualify that by saying a year ago we were actually expecting it to be closer to 7, because this is the year that the debt service is going to fully kick in for paying back on the bonds for the police and fire. So as staff was proposing and the select board was recommending and town meeting was approving the project and the budget, we all knew that there would be a significant increase in debt service costs this year, and there would be an increase in the tax rate to pay for that. The number that we had at that time was 6.88 cents is what we were estimating, and right now in the long-term financial plan it's at 6.3. I think we can do a little better than that, but probably only a little better. We're finalizing the FY18 proposed budget right now. Those numbers are pretty well refined, and there's not a lot of room there. But as we go further out in the forecast, there is room to do better than the numbers I'm about to tell you, because of the fact that we have forecasted conservatively and because we have time to make good decisions, to make some changes that will position us better. So in the next 3 years, we have about a 2.5 cent increase, which is about 2% increase for each of those 3 years. And then out in the 5th year of the forecast, a 4.5 cent increase. And I just want to reinforce that we shouldn't be too startled by that. That's the one that's furthest out, so it's got all the impact of those conservative assumptions compounded on each other each year going out to the 5th year of the forecast. And it's what we believe at this point, with everything that we know at this point, it is the worst case scenario barring a disaster. So we've got 5 years to work together to make good decisions. I don't believe that the increase of about 4% or 4.5 cents is actually going to happen in 2022 or 2022. But the reason we do long-term planning is so that we can see something like that coming and know that as we make decisions between now and then, we can actually calculate how that will improve the situation in real dollars. I'll answer the second part first because I don't know how the all-payer might affect these numbers at all. So that's something we will have to learn as that evolves, like everybody else. I just don't have a full enough understanding to give you a straight answer about it. The layer, though, is a very clear issue. So we're assuming $150,000 of let me say this, sorry. It'd be probably simplest to do it for each individual person. The understanding of the plan would be best if we talk about an individual person. So an individual employee who is covered only for themselves on the plan is responsible for the first $1,500 in a given year. And then between $1,500 and $3,000, the town's HRA layer will cover the additional healthcare costs. And above $3,000, Blue Cross will cover it for the services provided for the premiums we pay. Okay. It's double those numbers for a family plan. So an employee who has family coverage is responsible for the first $3,000, yeah, sorry. And the town will be responsible for the $3,000 to $6,000 layer. The deductible from Blue Cross's point of view is at $6,000. And then they pay the insurance, the claims after that. The important part of how that HRA piece works, though, is because some families or individuals are going to use everything in the layer. Some are only going to use a bit of it. Some aren't going to even get into it. Actuarially, the insurance people can forecast pretty accurately what a group of people experience is likely to be. And so we took their forecast, which was they thought because the HRA in our case is not paying the first dollars, because it's only kicking in after the employees have paid their obligation. And just actuarially in terms of usage, the estimate is that it'll be between 45 and 50% is of the potential total obligation that the town would have is what will actually pay out. So we've used a 57.5% factor in creating a budget for that. So we've got about 10% cushion. We expect to not only not exceed the 57.5, we expect to actually have some savings from this plan based on the actuarial performance. But we didn't want to go, right at that, 45 to 50 spot, because that's average. And if we had a worse than average year, we'd be looking around for money to pay those bills. So I'm going to reveal to the group that Mr. Stuckey gave me a heads up. He's going to ask this, and I say that because we had a good conversation about this during breakfast, and I want to relay that to everybody else. I believe, first of all, we don't have a staff person who is a housing coordinator or in any other way officially and fully devoted to housing issues in the community. I believe that in the way that we do approach housing issues, it meets my standard of being actively concerned. We have multiple people who, for part of their responsibilities, including myself, part of the responsibilities in service to the whole community, are actively concerned about housing and engaged with the nonprofit organizations and the state and the others who do housing work for a living. But how much we're engaged and exactly what role we're playing varies in different circumstances and different times throughout the year. So for instance, we provide, and I say that, one last thing in terms of the conversation we had, it's a fairly debatable point about how active one is. So, and there's a difference between being proactive versus actively supporting, right? Looking for an opportunity to take an action versus actively supporting the actions that are being taken that are positively impacting the community. So, with full respect for all of that, let me describe just a couple of things that we do, and we do routinely. In the last couple of years, during the time that I've actually been with the town, right away, I arrived in January of 2015, and you may recall that was a pretty harsh winter, and almost immediately we were confronted with some homelessness-related issues. We had people experiencing homelessness who were in real danger of freezing to death on the streets. The groundworks were doing a really good job of providing them nighttime shelter, but in the morning they were back out on the street, and it was just too bitter cold to be walking on the street or seeking outdoor shelter at that time in a bitter February Vermont day. And so particularly at the Works, but in some other downtown locations, we had issues that arose around what was going on with all of that. The proprietor at the Works was really great in terms of the attitude that he took towards that, and he convened some community meetings at the Works to talk about what can we all do to address this. He wanted to be compassionate rather than, I don't want those folks in my store. It wasn't like that. And that was really neat. And so we got a really active conversation going around how, state agencies and the town and, well-organized, larger-scale nonprofits and really shoestring, doing it with heart and soul rather than money nonprofits, and how all of us together might collaborate in a way that can make the situation better. That conversation is still ongoing. Some really good things have come out of it, but it's work that's not done, probably won't ever be done. We've created, though, a network and a way to collaborate that has been good. We were blessed last winter with a milder winter, and these issues weren't as daunting, but it was still winter, and there were still definitely the need to provide some proper overnight shelter and do some other things to help people move out of homelessness and into a more permanent housing situation. So that's a place where we've done a lot of work together. And then when Groundworks this summer, when their plans for their new shelter didn't work out, that's a place where we actually were partners in working for weeks to identify, make sure that there was, at least for this winter, a solution to that, while Groundworks as an organization thinks about the bigger picture in the longer term. And as you probably all know, we're going to be going back to the Baptist Church for one more winter. We hadn't planned to do that again. We planned actually that last year was the last year at the Baptist Church, but the Baptist Church has been great about that. The new owner of the building has been great about that, and that's where it's going to be. So that's an example of where there's some really active work going on, but it is in collaboration with those who are primarily responsible for it. We don't have a primary responsibility for any aspect of that. The other way in which the town really substantively helps a bunch of different agencies, large and small, in the community that are doing important housing work is through the Community Development Block Grant Program. So the state, through the federal rules that feed that money out to do community building work, that's very specific to housing in many cases, and then has a broader economic development focus for some other loans and grants. The state can't and won't make those grants directly to private entities. The town has to be the financial agent for those grants. And I don't say that like we have to do it and it's a burden, but the rules require that it be a municipality, and that's a role that we play and we're happy to play, and leads to real collaboration with groups that are planning different kinds of activities. So right now we're actively involved with Westgate and the Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust. We have done work in the past through that program with Groundworks. We, through town government, local funds, make grants to the Brattleboro Area Affordable Housing Group. And of course have a long relationship with Brattleboro Housing Authority, which was created by the town back in the 1960s. So, sorry, long way of saying I think we're doing what we can and should be doing in a financially responsible way. We could devote more resources to that, but there is so much activity in our community going around that issue, and a lot of good work being done by the nonprofit organizations, that I think it's appropriate for town government to be playing a supporting role, an actively supporting role on that issue.
Thank you for a very good presentation. Back when I was on the Finance Committee, the Town Meeting Finance Committee, one of the things that we looked at was the benefit to, in particular, police and firemen, where if they took early retirement or retired at age 55 or whatever they were allowed to under the contract, there was a period of 10 years or something where they got benefit of the town. And the worry there is, if we had a lot of people retiring all once, that could be a balloon, a lot of, has that been addressed? I don't think I heard you talk about that this morning. Have you looked at that?
Yeah, there's a payout of earned leave is what it amounts to. So vacation time is paid and a portion of sick time is paid. Yes, if several people retire in the larger departments in 1 year, that can be a significant amount. In the smaller departments, if just one person who's been here a long time retires, that can be a significant amount, particularly in the scale of those smaller department budgets. So that's a real issue for us. It's a real issue for a lot of governments. A lot of private sector employees scratch their heads and say, you get a leave payout when you retire? It's a really normal thing. It is in the union contracts. For government employees, it's a really normal thing. It's in the union contracts. There's been some work done before my watch. We addressed other things in this most recent round of negotiations with the unions, so we didn't address that particular issue, but there has been some work done in some prior rounds of negotiation around that issue. I don't know exactly what the details of those are. I'm operating now with what I've inherited in terms of the benefit that is owed to the employees in that regard. In the best case circumstances where there's enough resources in the community and good long-term planning being done, what you do is set up a reserve for those. And it doesn't create ups and downs in your operating budget. It's set aside, it's managed so that you know what your liability is. And in fact, we know what our liability is. That number is calculated each year. But you know what your liability is for what the total accrued leave is that people might be able to retire and walk away with. And when that happens, you draw from the reserve to make the payment rather than from your operating budget. And so your operating budget is unaffected by that obligation. We don't have that here, and I would suggest to you that we have higher priority needs in terms of improving our financial management that are both going to have a larger impact financially and a larger impact to the community. Chief among those is the capital. You know, we've got to significantly increase our investment in capital. We're proposing through a combination of scooching up what we're paying out of real-time revenues, out of property taxes and other real-time revenues, and using some portion of our accumulated fund balance. We're proposing $1.5 million. In the long-term financial plan, we identify $1.5 million of capital investment for this FY18 budget. We've been routinely spending between $300,000 and $800,000 a year. So given the variety of challenges we face, it would be really good to be meeting that need with a reserve, but I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future.
So we take that risk.
We do take that risk. And we try to manage it by looking ahead. You know, we can't always know exactly when folks are going to retire, but you know, we have a feel. We certainly know the longevity of our employees, and you know, if there were a large number hired within a couple of years that are all clustered together, you know, we know that a few years from now we're going to be taking a hit. We did address that actually in the long-term plan. We had tried to identify where those years are, where there should be some additional funding, but we may be off on that. That's one of those educated guesses.
Peter, the town and the enterprise did a comprehensive audit of all the town buildings. And each building had a long list of energy conservation measures with price tags associated with each and with return, payback from energy savings. How is all of that worked into either the capital plan or some other finance mechanism where the savings would pay for the cost of that program?
Sure. Those projects will be addressed in the capital plan. And in the capital plan, we have projects that are to be funded with local tax dollars. We have projects that are to be funded with grants or donations. There's certain things like in recreational facilities, we've accomplished a lot as a community where there's been an approval to do something, but only when enough money has been raised. So that was true out at West River Park, and it's been a great success. It's true right now in real-time planning for the skate park and the dog park up at Memorial Park. So those are situations where a project like that would be identified, and then the funding for that would be grants. So it's shown on the plan because it's part of the work we're going to be doing, but it's not part of the calculation about how much we need to raise in taxes to make the capital plan work. Likewise with grants, and so there are some potential grant opportunities related to the energy efficiencies. There's also related to other kinds of projects that we do. Really the widest variety of things because of the money that flows down through the state. There's some road system and drainage system and other kinds of things that are also potentially grant funded. So we try to identify those opportunities as well and list that as revenue sources for the capital plan. So the bottom line is that the doing of the projects, the expenditures that we expect to be required based on the cost estimates for those projects would be shown as part of the capital plan. And the funding may be coming from some grants or maybe money that needs to be spent from town operating funds, depending on how that evolves. And some projects are identified only as to be pursued when there's an alternative source of funding. Some are not. So sometimes what will happen is if it's considered a high enough priority project, the staff might recommend and the board might approve and town meeting approve that there's going to be a project pursued and we've set aside operating funds to do it, but we're still going to be seeking grant money because what we hope to do is be able to fund that with a grant and free up that money so that maybe next year we can address a different need with those saved funds. So in the capital fund, there's always some savings. We have about $500,000 right now of fund balance in the capital fund from exactly those kinds of situations. The combination of, some projects go over budget, so you draw off of that fund balance. Some projects come in under budget and you feed a little more money into that fund balance. And then some projects get funded by a grant or some other source and we don't have to spend the money at all. And it saves money and it sits in that fund balance. So we try to manage that so that it doesn't ever grow too large and we draw out of it. We've drawn out of it this year, actually, for some of the work that we've done. I believe that was, I can speculate. I'll be wrong if I try to go from memory on it. But there was,
The library heating system?
that was actually through the READ money, the endowment at the library. And there's, we used, this past year, we used some of the fund balance that I just described that is sort of the managed balance of the capital fund. And we used some fund balance, just as general operating fund balance. That I remember we devoted to the Bonneville Road retaining wall and the work at the swimming pool at Memorial Park. I don't remember exactly what we applied the capital fund balance work to. But in each given year as we go forward, depending on what our success has been with finding other funding sources, we will draw on that capital fund balance in addition to the real-time revenues in that year to get as much good work done as we can. The energy efficiency work is in that mix. One of the things that's complicating the energy efficiency decision-making right now, and we try to take a longer-term perspective than just what oil prices are this year, is oil prices this year are, near or at record lows. And so we're at a situation where the payback assumptions in the audit aren't reflecting a current reality. They probably do still reflect a longer-term reality. So we're committed to doing the work. The current situation with the oil market makes that more of a good for the planet calculation and not as powerfully a good for the town budget calculation as it is in the audit. And so given the variety of other needs we have, we're looking at trying to identify some of the highest priority energy projects. So we do show some positive momentum on that, but it may not be the full body of what's been recommended.
I really hate to do this, but I'm going to say I have to wrap it up. I want to thank you.
You're welcome.